Next, I'd like to introduce Ms. Lisa Kitagawa. She is a Japanese-American bilingual business lawyer at Kitagawa and Ebert, which has offices in Irvine, California and Plano, Texas by appointment. She provides legal representation to many prominent Japanese companies throughout the U.S. And please help me welcome Ms. Kitagawa.
ご紹介お預かり、本当に光栄でございます。北川二部法律事務所の弁護士北川です。これから英語でさせていただきます。Thank you so much. I am honored to participate in the Japan-Texas Economic Summit. I am so grateful to the U.S. Council Chair, Phyllis Campbell, the dynamic and powerful President Irene Hirano Inoue, the visionary Donna Cole, and Texas lawyer Kei Ashizawa, the many dignitaries and the many collaborating organizations and sponsors for their leadership to make the Japan-Texas Economic Summit possible. The U.S.-Japan Council builds bridges between Japan and the U.S. with leaders in government, businesses, professions, and communities. It also encourages Japanese Americans like me who have a connection to Japan from a shared heritage and culture. Although my parents were born in America and my grandfather earned his PhD in organic chemistry and petroleum products in 1928 from Ohio State, they couldn't get a job, so they returned to Japan. My parents, as children, survived the horrific American firebombings of Tokyo. They saw starvation and death and the horrors of war. When the war ended, they served in the U.S. Army in Tokyo, and then they returned to California, and I was born and raised in California. My parents raised me to be proud of my Japanese heritage and grateful to be an American. For Japanese businesses to succeed in Texas, it would be wise to understand the cultural differences and paradigms that are reflected in today's legal systems and our societies, businesses, relationships, and transactions. Today's talk is to highlight some key points for Japanese about U.S. business law. The United States was founded on the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are all individual rights, fundamental, inalienable rights. And the purpose of government is to protect those rights. Now, freedom can also be impinged upon when government interferes with those rights. The U.S. legal system has a court system with judges to interpret the law. And the theory is that justice is blind, but we often know that actually there are prejudices and certain preconceptions that will also take place. So the U.S. Constitution has a jury system, a jury of your peers. Now, American juries, unlike Japan, can decide not only criminal matters, but also civil matters. So sometimes an American jury will come up with a punitive damage award, which seems excessive. And the difficulty for Japanese companies is that it's difficult to find Japanese people on the jury. So to minimize that risk, I would suggest that you consider alternative dispute resolution options, such as arbitration, which you can do by contract, so you can avoid the risk of a jury trial. Now, Texas, the Lone Star State. Turns out my grandfather went to Texas A&M as well for his undergraduate degree. Everything is bigger in Texas. Even the flags are bigger in Texas. And when Toyota and Kubota and Daikin moved to Texas, I became a Texas lawyer 4 years ago. And I opened my office in Plano, Texas. 4 years ago, there wasn't much there near Legacy, and now it's booming. Texas can be its own world economy. Texas is the 11th largest GDP in the world. It's bigger than many countries, including Canada, Mexico, Australia. Texas has already passed New York, and this slide is from data in 2015. Judging from the rate of Texas's growth, I am sure it will probably pass California. One of the reasons for Texas's success is that it has great tax benefits. So although there is no state income tax for either the corporation, there's also no state income tax for individuals. But you should be aware that Texas property taxes are the 4th highest in the country. And I've also noticed governments have a way of calling things something different. So they might not call it a tax, but they'll call it a fee. So for Japanese companies, when you're considering doing contracts, unlike the Japanese style where it's very vague and you fix your hanko seal on it, you need to really consider the specifics of the contract, not just how many things and the price and when payment is due. You should also pay attention to these provisions because they will impact what will happen if there's a breach. So for example, governing law, where do you want this to be? If you're a seller, do you want to be the creditor in the state of Texas? And do you want venue to be where you are or where the buyer is? You want to try to improve your chances for success by carefully considering these provisions. Also remember that legal fees and costs are generally not included unless they're stated in the contract. Employment laws. Texas is very company friendly. Texas generally follows federal law. So minimum wage in federal law is only $7.25. And amazingly, you could still find people who are willing to work for that. Texas also follows federal law with respect to tipped employees. So tipped employees only need to be paid $2.13 an hour. Texas also has federal overtime laws. So you do not have to pay overtime unless the non-exempt employee has worked more than 40 hours a week. Now, as I was mentioning, American laws are based on the concept of individual rights. So we have lots of anti-discrimination laws in the US and in Texas. So you'll notice the difference is a Japanese typical resume will have a photograph, the birth date, and a lot of personal information on there, which you would never find in America. So don't expect a photograph when you request a resume from an applicant. Also, be very careful of age. You cannot ask, when did you graduate from high school? Because then you could easily calculate the age. What you should also be aware of is that you cannot discriminate by asking questions about pregnancy or if they have children. But you are allowed to ask questions in interviews, such as, are you able to work overtime? That's work-related. But you shouldn't ask a lot of personal questions like, are you gay? Honestly, as a business person, you should pay attention to careful screening and hiring. I firmly believe, and I've litigated a lot of these cases throughout the US, I firmly believe that 90% of your problems can be avoided if you carefully screen your applicants. I was in Kyushu in December with my family, and I was surprised to see this sign that said, all gender bathroom. It's amazing. In America, this has become a big issue in many states, very controversial. But Texas does not recognize or protect gender identity or sexual orientation. There are certain cities in Texas that do. As for America, we also have a notice requirement, business practices, and disclosures and warnings. The idea is that if you give warning or information to that consumer or the buyer, then it's fair to them because they had a chance to realize what the risks are. But sometimes those risks can seem to be very small compared to the reality. So for example, there's the infamous McDonald's hot coffee case. Now, there is a warning on this cup. Warning, contents hot. But they didn't tell you that it was actually 190 degrees. And the jury verdict in favor of the plaintiff was $2.9 million. What you also need to know, and that was always and still is to this day held up as an example of how ridiculous American jury verdicts can be. But what you also need to know is that woman had third-degree burns, and she was in the hospital for 8 days, and she had 2 years of surgery and was permanently disabled. So that jury verdict was reduced after appeal and after settlement for less than $600,000. Now, some of these warnings can really seem unnecessary. So for example, I like fishing. And amazingly, on the lure, it says, warning, contents may be harmful if swallowed. Well, maybe if you're a fish. So the Japanese often say that America is a legal animal. I don't think that America is a legal animal. I think it's a pet. I think that it is not dangerous. It can be dangerous if it's unleashed, but it can be controlled. So for risk management, it's important for Japanese to follow this proverb, right? Take a cane lest you fall. Or the Japanese saying, the English saying, which is even better, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And the point is that there are 16 ounces in 1 pound. So although, for example, legal fees are not free, I don't know what happened here. This is interesting. Legal fees are not free. They're like insurance premiums, and they are a good investment to avoid risks. Also, when you hire a lawyer, please hire someone who is licensed in the state of Texas. There's a problem with the fact that there are so many bilingual Japanese bengoshi, but they're not licensed in Texas. They might be licensed in that place called New York, but they're not really familiar with American business culture or American business practices. So be careful of that and let a Texas lawyer be on your team. Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Kitagawa. Our final speaker for this session is Mr. Bill Strang, President of Operations and E-Commerce at Toto USA. Mr. Strang is responsible